Welcome to Viso W. Today, we're taking on a deep and pretty challenging mission, actually. We're exploring the architecture of coercive control.
That's right.
We're going to look at how these psychological manipulation methods work on two really different levels.
Yeah, vastly different scales.
Exactly. From, the really personal, intense dynamic in a toxic relationship, all the way up to the big geopolitical stage, international conflict, psychological warfare. It's quite a scope.
It is a sobering task, definitely.
Yeah.
But it's essential because when you line up the source material we're looking at today, one focusing on intimate abuse, the other on, statecraft and legal crises.
Right.
The patterns that emerge are, frankly, disturbingly consistent. We're essentially mapping out the playbook.
The playbook used by those who want total control over someone or some group.
Exactly. Whether that target is one person or, an entire population.
Okay, so let's talk about our sources. They really set up this contrast. On the micro level, we've got excerpts from Dr. Aaron K. Leonard's book, Emotional Terrorism, Breaking the Chains of a Toxic Relationship.
A foundational text.
It really gives us the language, the clinical terms, to discuss psychological abuse properly.
And then giving that sort of profound real-world context to the domestic side, we have findings from the final report, Hague Convention and Domestic Violence.
That sounds heavy.
It is. It's a big study, very comprehensive. It details the experiences of battered mothers, who had to flee with their kids to the U.S. for safety.
Only to face more problems.
Exactly. They get here seeking refuge and then find themselves tangled up in legal petitions filed by their abusers demanding the children be returned under the Hague Convention.
Wow. Okay. And the third source?
The third bridges these two worlds. It's a detailed overview of psychological warfare, or PSWAR,
Right.
tracing its history, how it evolved right up to its modern digital forms.
So the big question we're putting out there for you, the listener, today is this. What are these fundamental universal strategies behind psychological control?
And maybe how does recognizing these patterns, these precise, repeatable tactics, how does that inform not just our personal defenses, but maybe our collective understanding?
Our understanding of vulnerability, resilience, on a global scale even. Okay, let's try and unpack this complex duality, starting with the dynamics of coercion in the personal sphere.
Okay, so definitions are key here. Dr. Aaron K. Leonard, she describes this unhealthy dynamic as emotional terrorism.
Strong term.
It is, and she's very clear. It's a sustained form of psychological abuse. Crucially, she frames it using roles. There's a projector.
The one initiating the abuse?
Yes, and a recipient who is the target.
What I found important in Leonard's work is how broad she makes the scope.
Yeah.
We often think of this just in terms of marriage or dating.
Romantic partners.
But she stresses that this projector-recipient dynamic, it could apply anywhere. Family members, friends, even coworkers.
Absolutely. The definition is based on the behavior, not just the type of relationship.
Makes sense.
And the consequences she details, they're immense. Devastating, really. Emotional terrorism leads to, tremendous pain, chronic confusion.
Feeling trapped.
Completely trapped within the relationship's dynamics.
Yeah.
And over time, this sustained psychological attack on the victim's sense of self, their reality. It can make the dynamic, as she puts it, deadly.
Deadly. It destroys their agency, their ability to act.
Precisely. Now, take that exact psychological blueprint, this calculated destruction of the target's internal world and their agency, and zoom way out. That's where we land squarely in the territory of psychological warfare, PSWAR.
So how is that formally defined?
The military definition is exceptionally clear and, frankly, a bit chilling in its precision.
Okay.
It's defined as any action which is practiced mainly by psychological methods with the aim of evoking a planned psychological reaction in other people.
Planned psychological reaction. That phrase really jumps out.
It does. It's the perfect macro-level mirror to the projector's, calculated control strategies in that personal relationship.
And this PSY practice, it's shown up throughout history under different names, right?
Oh, absolutely. Classic propaganda, obviously. Political warfare. Then there's the more nuanced idea of hearts and minds, especially in counterinsurgency.
And today.
Today, the current military term is often Military Information Support Operations, or MISO.
But the core idea is the same.
That's what's truly insightful here, the shared foundation. Both emotional terrorism and PSWAR describe a highly deliberate, planned psychological strategy. Planned and executed with the specific goal of controlling the target's behavior, their perception, their decisions.
So in the personal context, maybe it's controlling where someone works, who they see, money.
Exactly, their personal choices. But in PSYR, the objective just scales up dramatically. It might seek to break the will of an enemy army.
Or force a government to give in.
Coerce an adversarial regime into capitulation, yes. Or discredit an entire opposition movement so nobody listens to them.
So that initial link, that analytical bridge, it seems undeniable.
It really is.
Whether we're talking about those sustained, quiet microaggressions from a coercive partner, the gaslighting, the isolation, or these massive state-level disinformation campaigns designed to confuse and divide whole populations.
Yeah.
Both strategies are aiming for the exact same thing, systematically undermining the target's basic sense of reality, their security, and their ability to act freely.
It's about establishing a dominant narrative, a non-negotiable narrative of control.
And that narrative, that control, it's maintained through specific tactics, which we see really clearly laid out in those reports on domestic abuse.
Exactly. And to understand just how extreme the situation can get, how far targets will go to escape this kind of coercion, we really need to look closely at that Hague Convention report. This study, it focuses on mothers who faced, well, extreme abuse in another country, and they fled with their children, coming to the U.S. for safety.
Sounds like the right move, but there's a catch.
There's a huge, tragic irony. They arrive in the U.S. seeking safety, and then under the Hague Convention on the civil aspects of international child abduction, they're legally classified as taking or abducting parents.
What? Even though they were fleeing abuse?
Yes, and they face a civil petition demanding the children be forcibly returned back to the country where the abuse happened.
That's unbelievable. They're trapped.
Completely trapped between survival and legal complexities. The study really highlights this impossible scenario. There's a quote from one mother. It just lays out the stark reality perfectly.
What did she say?
She said, basically, there's three choices in these situations. 1, you stay there in those conditions and you survive as long as you can. 2, you walk away from your child and you walk away. 3, you run with your child. So there's 3. That's it.
Wow. Just 3 options, and none of them good. Stay and endure, abandon your child, or run and be labeled an abductor.
That quote, it isn't just drama. It distills the total lack of viable, safe, legal options they had in their country of residence.
So fleeing to the U.S. wasn't just a choice, it was
a survival mechanism, driven by a profound lack of local support from institutions, which we'll get into more detail on later.
And what did they do when they got to the U.S.? Does that support the idea they were seeking safety?
Absolutely. The study found nearly 82% of them, that's 18 out of the 22 cases looked at, moved to the U.S. specifically to be with family.
For support.
Crucial emotional and financial support. Mostly their parents, 14 of the women went to their parents. Now, if you look at that sociologically...
Like normal coping behavior, right?
Yeah.
In an abuse situation.
Universally recognized as normal, self-preserving coping behavior. Seek safety, seek support from your network.
But legally, this triggers a massive problem around the child's habitual residence.
That's the linchpin. Habitual residence is the key concept the Hague Convention uses to decide which country has jurisdiction. And this is where the history of coercion just fundamentally corrupts that legal concept.
How so?
Well, this is where the analysis gets really critical. A significant number, 40% of the mothers, reported that their initial decision to even live in that other country, it wasn't freely made.
They were forced or tricked.
It was the direct result of coercion, force, or deception by their husbands. For instance, maybe pressured to move for his job, promised a better life.
Only to find themselves isolated.
Immediately isolated and controlled once they got abroad, cut off from their support systems back home.
So if the decision to live there was coerced in the first place.
Meaning the victim never truly consented to establishing their life there, but was sort of compelled by threats or manipulation.
Then the whole basis for the Hague petition, the child's habitual residence there.
It's fundamentally undermined, isn't it?
It seems like it should be.
Exactly. The argument the report makes is really powerful. If you determine a child's habitual residence just based on how long they lived somewhere,
ignoring the coercion that forced them to stay there,
you're essentially further perpetuating abuse against both the mother and the child. You're using the legal system to reinforce the abuser's control.
It weaponizes the law against the survivor.
That's a perfect way to put it. And the decision to finally flee, it was often made under immediate escalating threat.
They tried to stay sometimes.
The report confirms that. 6 women who tried to stay in the foreign country after separating from their husbands, They faced immediate intensified violence and stalking.
So the flight wasn't just precautionary.
No, it was essential for immediate survival.
Okay, so let's dig into the specific tactics used. These coercive strategies you mentioned, seen in these personal relationships, they sound like a blueprint.
They really are. It's quite chilling how consistent they are. And if you just imagine these tactics scaled up, applied to a nation.
They look like PSYWR.
Instantly recognizable as sophisticated psychological warfare and strategic isolation, yeah.
So what's tactic number 1?
The first, and probably the most potent, is leveraging existential fear, lethal threats, and intimidation.
And the data shows this was common.
Very. The stakes were incredibly high. 68.2% of the women, that's 15 out of 22 in the study, genuinely feared for their lives or their children's lives.
Why? Direct threats.
Direct threats or just escalating, unpredictable, rageful behavior that felt life-threatening.
Can you give an example? Sometimes the details really drive it home.
Absolutely. And the anecdotes show the calculation behind it. It's not just raw anger. Take Pamela's husband. He was a former police officer.
So his threats would feel very credible.
Utterly credible. When she even suggested leaving, he threatened to kill her and throw her body in a ditch.
Horrifying.
And later, he cemented that threat. He actually boasted that killing people was like stepping on a mouse.
That's not just anger, that's strategic terror.
It's a calculated statement designed purely to induce terror and ensure compliance. And look at Marina's experience. Her husband, also a former police officer.
Another one with that background.
Yes. And he demonstrated the sort of sophisticated knowledge of how to inflict harm without leaving legal evidence.
Oh.
He put an ice pick to her stomach and told her, "I can hit you all I want and I will never leave a bruise on you."
That shows planning. Intent.
Planned intent to inflict terror while maintaining plausible deniability, which is, a critical element in any controlled psychological operation, big or small.
Okay, so beyond physical threats, what's next in the playbook?
The next pillar is economic control. Financial abuse was extremely prevalent in these cases.
How common?
Nearly 45.5% of the women reported having zero independent access to money or any financial resources, completely cut off.
Which makes leaving almost impossible, right? It ensures total dependency.
Total dependency. It prevents any real hope of independent escape or survival. And it forces the victim into these extreme, often dangerous acts of covert resistance just to survive.
Like what?
Well, Megan, for example, she was actually paid in cash for some work she did, but she had to hide the money.
Where?
Get this. Inside record sleeves. Over a long time, just secretly stashing cash away to scrape together the bare minimum needed to escape.
Wow. That takes incredible planning and risk.
And abusers often weaponize debt, too. Rebecca's husband, he ran up a huge debt deliberately in her name.
In her name?
Yes. And then explicitly warned her that if she ever went back to the U.S., she'd be legally on the hook for all of it.
So the debt becomes like a fence.
An invisible international financial fence. It traps her. It makes the cost of freedom seem like complete personal financial ruin.
If you look at that through the macro lens, the PSYWR lens, it sounds a lot like a geopolitical containment strategy.
Exactly. Making an enemy state economically dependent or hitting them with sanctions so severe they can't fund their own existence, let alone move outside your sphere of influence. It's the same principle.
So threats, economic control. What else?
Isolation and control over mobility. This escalates quickly. Husbands made deliberate, systematic efforts to cut the woman off from her support network.
Oh, monitoring calls. Social media.
All of that. Tracking calls, checking social media, sometimes outright forbidding any contact with friends or even family back home.
Leading to total isolation.
Which then often escalated to the ultimate form of physical containment, controlling their passports.
Taking away their ability to leave legally.
Or even physically destroying the documents. Ellen's husband destroyed her passport and her child's passport, and he explicitly told her she would never be returning to my country. Full stop.
That's blatant imprisonment.
It is.
Yeah.
And another case, Katie's husband, he was more cunning. He deliberately let her immigration status lapse become defunct, so he could then file a Hague petition knowing she couldn't legally return to his country to fight the custody case herself without facing deportation.
That's incredibly manipulative. Orchestrated, as the mother said.
Very well. Orchestrated, yes. She recognized the setup.
And all this leads to discrediting the target, making sure no one believes them.
Exactly. This is the universal weapon of choice in pretty much any psychological operation, discrediting the target. It's a form of personal propaganda designed to destroy their credibility before they even get a chance to speak out.
You mentioned Ellen's case earlier in this context.
Yes, it's such a stark example of weaponizing institutions and language barriers.
Yeah.
Her husband took her to psychiatrists in his country.
For help.
Under the guise of getting help, yes. But he systematically discredited her to them, painting her as mentally ill before she could effectively communicate her side. Because of the language barrier, the foreign psychiatrists were essentially only hearing the abuser's narrative.
So the medical system became a tool of coercion.
An unwitting tool, yes. The strategic destruction of the target's credibility is absolutely the linchpin.
Whether it's undermining one person's reputation,
Or running a massive global campaign to undermine, say, the democratic process in another country.
the goal is the same.
The objective is identical. Make absolutely sure that when the target speaks their truth, tells their story, they are automatically dismissed, seen as unreliable, hysterical, unstable, crazy.
We absolutely have to focus on the children now, because they're not just, collateral damage in all this.
No, far from it. They are primary, deeply affected stakeholders in this personal psychological warfare. The toll is immense.
The report had statistics on this.
Yes, a sobering one. 86.4% of the children in this sample were exposed to the domestic violence.
Exposed meaning they saw it or heard it.
Either directly witnessed it or were present during incidents, yes.
And the effects weren't abstract, I assume.
Not at all. They were visceral, long-lasting. Children experienced severe anxiety, nervousness, chronic sleep problems.
Nightmares.
Yeah.
Trouble concentrating.
All of that. And exhibiting various internalizing behaviors, becoming withdrawn, depressed, or externalizing ones like aggression or acting out. Their whole psychological landscape was fundamentally altered by living in that constant state of fear and tension.
Are there any specific stories that illustrate just how deep this harm goes?
There are. They're powerful. Take the account of Tamra's son. He was only 5 years old when his father attacked his mother.
5 years old.
5 years later, when he was interviewed for the study, he could still vividly recall the exact details of where I was hit and where my head hit the wall.
Even though he wasn't the primary target, he remembered the physical details years later.
Exactly. The trauma was deeply embedded. And the study also found that even when mothers tried really hard to shield their children, move the arguments to another room,
The kids still knew.
the terror just permeated the home atmosphere. Sandra's daughter, she was 6, she drew a picture.
A picture of what?
A picture of her father with his fists over me. Even though her mother had tried to shield her from the worst of the physical confrontations, the child's awareness, her internal processing of the threat, it ran deep.
All these symptoms, the chronic worry, the anxiety, the distress, they sound like PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder.
They are entirely consistent with a PTSD diagnosis, yes. Regardless of whether the child was ever physically touched during an incident, the psychological impact is profound.
Which brings us to a big problem in the legal system, right? The grave risk paradox you mentioned with the Hague Convention.
Yes, this is a major point of tension and, frankly, failure. The grave risk defense arguing there's a grave risk of physical or psychological harm or an intolerable situation if the child is returned, that's the main legal shield available.
So how does it play out in court?
Well, the study reveals this profound gap between what social science tells us about child trauma and how the law is often applied. Judges were, perhaps predictably, most likely to deny the return petition, meaning protect the child, when the children were either the direct, intentional targets of physical violence.
Like child abuse.
Yes, clear child maltreatment. Or if they were unintentionally physically hurt during an attack on the mother. For example, if the mother was holding the child when she was beaten.
So the law recognizes obvious, measurable physical injury.
Easily. But here's the problem. Judges typically ordered the return of the children when serious domestic violence had occurred, but the harm to the child was categorized more narrowly.
As just witnessing.
Merely as witnessing or simple awareness of the violence. This narrow interpretation runs directly counter to decades of social science research.
Which shows that witnessing is harmful.
Consistently links exposure to domestic violence, just witnessing it, to psychological harm that is equivalent to being directly victimized.
Does the data from the successful cases back that up?
It does. PTSD was diagnosed in 67% of the successful grave risk cases, meaning the mothers who managed to win their defense often had children with provable, chronic psychological injury.
But the research says many more kids are harmed, even without a formal diagnosis.
Absolutely. Social science literature widely confirms that children exposed to DV have similar levels of emotional distress, academic problems, behavioral issues as children who are actually physically abused themselves.
So the courts are struggling here.
The issue seems to be that courts often struggle to equate exposure with grave risk of harm. They often prioritize the Hague Convention's goal of prompt return over the deep findings of child welfare experts.
It effectively dismisses the psychological terror unless it results in bruises or a formal diagnosis.
That's often the practical outcome, yes. It overlooks the sustained psychological impact unless it manifests in ways the legal system easily quantifies.
And this failure, this inability to really recognize the strategic nature of coercive control, it wasn't just happening in the U.S. courts dealing with the Hague Convention, was it?
No, not at all. The source material details a really dramatic and frankly devastating failure rate among the foreign authorities these mothers initially turned to for help, back in the country where the abuse was happening.
What kind of failure rate are we talking about?
It's staggering. It really highlights why fleeing was often the only option left. Of the 13 women in the study who bravely went to the foreign police or courts to report the violence.
13 of them tried.
Yes. And none of them received effective assistance for the domestic violence. Zero.
None. That's shocking.
It basically meant the local institutions effectively sanctioned the continued abuse through inaction, or worse. And it compelled these women to take the extreme step of fleeing across international borders.
Were these just bureaucratic failures or something more?
Often much more. The institutional breakdowns weren't just about slow paperwork. They actively reinforced the abuser's power sometimes. Kendra, for instance, she contacted the police after a brutal attack. The officers came, and then, in front of her husband, they told him that he could slap her to stop her from being up talking.
And they told him that.
Yes, directly undermining her safety and validating his control.
And the courts weren't any better.
The judicial or court systems could be equally misogynistic. Marta was told explicitly by court officials to simply go make my husband happy so that he wouldn't beat me.
Blaming the victim entirely.
It demonstrates not just institutional sexism, but this profound systemic discounting of women's safety, placing the entire burden of preventing violence squarely on the victim's behavior and compliance.
Did things like socioeconomic status play a role?
It seems so. The study noted that abuse was sometimes dismissed based on the victim's background. Jennifer, who was a professional living in an affluent area,
They didn't believe her.
she found the police were disinclined to get involved. They apparently saw domestic abuse mainly as a poverty problem.
So if you didn't fit their stereotype of a victim,
You faced additional barriers, both bureaucratic and psychological. Your experience wasn't taken as seriously.
okay, so escaping the country, often with no help from local authorities, was incredibly hard. But then they faced the legal battle in the U.S. You mentioned costs earlier.
Yes, and the financial barriers alone are just prohibitive. Immediately upon arrival, they face this massive legal challenge. The average cost for mounting a Hague defense,
How much?
over $60,000 on average, with costs in complex cases ranging up to $300,000.
$300,000. For mothers who, as we heard, often had zero independent access to money.
Exactly. For women subjected to years of financial abuse, that cost is utterly insurmountable. It's an impossible hurdle right at the start.
And is there a difference in the resources available to each side? The father filing the petition versus the mother defending against it?
A huge disparity. This is a core part of the systemic failure. The left-behind fathers, the petitioners, they often have access to powerful networks.
Like what?
Government networks, like the U.S. Department of State's attorney networks, access to large, sophisticated law firms doing pro bono work. They frequently received government help with travel costs, preparation.
And the mothers.
The mothers, the respondents, they typically had to rely on already overburdened legal aid agencies or maybe small family law practices. And often they struggled just to find a lawyer who even understood the complex international dynamics of coercive control and the Hague Convention.
So the legal playing field is tilted from the start.
Dramatically tilted, usually in favor of the abuser, who often still retains financial control even after separation.
Is there anything courts try to do to ensure safety if a child is ordered returned?
Yes, U.S. courts often try to mitigate the risk by ordering voluntary agreements. They're called undertakings.
Undertakings, what are they supposed to do?
They're meant to provide specific safety guarantees for the mother and children upon their return to the other country. Things like, ensuring access to housing, restraining orders, maybe supervision of contact.
Sounds good in theory. Do they work?
Here's the ultimate proof of the system's limitation. The study found that these undertakings, these court orders intended to ensure safety, were never implemented by the fathers in the other country, not in a single case studied.
Never.
Never. Once the child and mother are back in the foreign jurisdiction, the U.S. court has no real way to enforce compliance. The orders were just routinely ignored.
Leaving the women and children just as vulnerable as before.
Exactly. It effectively confirmed the mother's original fears about the lack of safety and institutional support back there. The system couldn't protect them across borders.
Okay, let's zoom back out now to the macro scale.
Yeah.
We need to really solidify this parallel you've been drawing between personal coercive control and state-level psychological manipulation.
Right. Because the core strategies, deception, isolation, undermining credibility, they aren't new inventions for PSYware. They are ancient techniques of warfare and statecraft.
How ancient are we talking?
Oh, as old as organized conflict itself. Alexander the Great, for example, he was a master practitioner. He didn't just conquer with force.
He used psychological methods.
Yeah, absolutely. Cultural co-option, spreading propaganda about his divine right to rule, even forcing mass marriages between his soldiers and local women. It was about psychologically integrating the conquered lands into his empire, not just occupying them.
So securing territory in people's minds, not just on the map.
Precisely. Even tactical deception has ancient roots. There's a story of Bias of Pran.
What did he do?
He was under siege. To end it, he supposedly took a few mules, fattened them up to look healthy, and then covered huge piles of sand with just a thin layer of wheat.
To make it look like they had plenty of food.
Exactly. He showed this to the envoys of the besieging king, Alyattes, who then thought the city could hold out indefinitely and lifted the siege. Pure perception management to achieve a strategic goal.
Okay, so the ideas are old, but mass communication must have changed things.
Exponentially. The printing press allowed for mass-produced leaflets. Radio allowed for broadcasting propaganda directly into enemy territory or influencing neutral countries.
Like in World War I.
Yes, the British were very aggressive in using their diplomatic channels and the press to document alleged German atrocities. Whether entirely true or exaggerated, it had a huge, planned psychological impact. It was key in swaying opinion in neutral countries like the U.S. towards joining the war.
And World War II. That seems like a major turning point for this stuff.
It absolutely was. World War II saw the formal development of really large-scale operational deception. Operation Bodyguard is the famous example.
The D-Day deception.
Exactly. The Allied plan to deceive the Germans about the Normandy landings. It was monumental.
What did it involve?
A whole range of things. Visual deception, mock tanks, inflatable landing craft, whole fake armies commanded by Patton, combined with really sophisticated disinformation spread through double agents, fake radio traffic.
All to convince the Germans the main attack was coming elsewhere.
To utterly convince them the invasion target was Pas de Calais, hundreds of miles away from the actual landing beaches in Normandy. And it worked.
That intense focus on managing perception, fabricating a reality on a mass scale.
It's the direct state-level equivalent of the personal gaslighting and reality manipulation we saw used by abusers.
Right. Destroying the target's ability to know what's real.
Exactly. To discern truth from fiction. So they make bad decisions based on the false reality you've created for them.
So now, bring us to the modern era, the digital battleground. How has this evolved?
Well, the manipulation has achieved unprecedented reach and sophistication. Modern PSYOPs leverage social media, digital platforms for global campaigns of disinformation, misinformation.
And they can be targeted very precisely.
With alarming precision. Based on user data, algorithms can tailor messages to specific demographics, even individuals exploiting their known biases or fears.
So it's old tactics with powerful new tools.
Precisely. We see this in recent reports. For example, audits have uncovered operations linked to people associated with the U.S. military.
Doing what?
Creating networks of fake accounts across multiple platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Telegram, you name it.
To spread certain messages.
To promote pro-Western narratives and systematically criticize adversarial nations like China, Russia, Iran. The goal isn't just putting information out there. It's covert influence, sowing confusion, shaping perceptions secretly.
And the mechanisms, the goals, do they echo the personal abuse tactics?
Chillingly so. Think about the projector's goal of isolation and discrediting. These covert actions are often designed specifically to destroy public confidence in any alternative narrative, any opposing voice.
You mentioned a UK group, JTRIG.
Yes, the Joint Threat Research Intelligence Group. Their stated goals, based on leaked documents, are quite explicit.
What are they?
Their mandate includes aims to destroy, deny, degrade, and disrupt enemies. And their methods explicitly include discrediting the target and planting misinformation or false stories.
Discrediting. There's that word again.
Exactly. And when we hear that term used by a state intelligence agency, we should immediately draw the line back to Ellen's husband taking her to psychiatrists to destroy her credibility.
It's the same fundamental tactic.
Whether the target is a mother trying to escape abuse, a political dissident challenging a regime, or an entire nation-state, the goal is identical. Destroy their credibility so their voice, their truth, their calls for help are ignored or dismissed.
And the digital world allows this to be constant.
Continuous low-grade emotional terrorism, almost. Algorithms can amplify fear, uncertainty, doubt, targeting specific emotional vulnerabilities identified through data analysis. It creates this environment of chronic stress and reality distortion.
That perfectly mimics the constant psychological pressure in a coercive relationship.
But on a global scale, it's sustained, strategic psychological pressure designed to erode collective agency, collective trust.
It's the ultimate form of isolation in a way, trapping people inside information bubbles curated by the projector.
Whether that projector is a state actor or an abusive partner, making it incredibly difficult to access a shared, objective reality.
Okay, so pulling this all together after this deep dive, it seems we've uncovered this really horrifying, fundamental consistency in the architecture of control.
Yes, that's the key finding, I think. Coercive control, it really doesn't matter if you're looking at the micro level, the emotional terrorism within a marriage, or the macro level state psychological warfare.
It functions through the same core mechanisms.
The exact same four, essentially. Strategic isolation, creating financial vulnerability and dependence, the manipulation of information and reality, and leveraging the credible threat of harm, whether physical or psychological.
And the ultimate goal in both spheres.
The destruction of the victim's agency, their ability to act, to think for themselves, to be believed, ensuring that when they finally do speak out or try to seek help, their narrative has already been undermined.
Preemptively dismissed as unstable, unreliable.
Making it the projector's perfect defense. Don't listen to them, they're crazy and hysterical.
So how do we combat this? What's the takeaway for resilience?
Well, on the personal level, we have to empower the victims by validating their experience. We really need to heed those defiant words synthesized from the mother's interviews in the Hague Report.
The ones about not being crazy.
Exactly. Understand that domestic violence is not a psychological problem. You are not crazy. That assertion, that rejection of the projector's false reality, that's the core of resilience, recognizing the manipulation for what it is.
And on a systemic level, what needs to change?
Practically, the research points to an immediate and profound need for change in our legal systems. We need continued, specialized training for judges, for attorneys, on the actual dynamics of domestic violence and how they intersect with laws like the Hague Convention.
To bridge that gap you mentioned.
We have to bridge that huge gap between the social science research, which clearly links emotional exposure, witnessing abuse, to severe psychological harm, like PTSD, and the current legal application, which too often still demands visible bruises or a formal diagnosis before taking protective action.
This whole analysis, it really gives profound insight into human vulnerability, doesn't it? We've seen how in these transnational cases, legal justice often boils down to whether abuse caused physical harm or a quantifiable psychological diagnosis like PTSD.
It does, and that leads us to the final provocative thought we wanted to leave you, the listener, with.
Okay.
Given that the modern era seems to be increasingly relying on sophisticated digital psychological warfare, operations that deliberately blur the lines between objective fact and manufactured fear, often on a mass scale,
Right.
we have to ask, what might be the collective long-term psychological impact on global society when political or military conflict itself relies so heavily, perhaps even primarily, on strategic digital manipulation? Are we essentially subjecting the world population to a form of continuous, low-grade, strategic emotional terrorism?
That's a deeply unsettling question. What does that constant environment of distrust and manipulation do to us collectively?
It's something we need to consider very seriously.
Yeah.
Recognizing the projector's playbook, whether it's being used by an individual or a state at any scale, That recognition is the absolutely indispensable first step toward any kind of defense.
Whether it's defending yourself in your own home or defending truth in the public sphere. Thank you for joining us for this really crucial deep dive into the architecture of control.
It was important to connect these dots.
It really was. If you found these insights valuable, and if you believe in the importance of understanding these connections between the personal and the political, please subscribe to our deep dives.
Like this content if it resonated with you.
And please comment with your own thoughts. What do you think about this universal nature of coercion we've discussed?
We appreciate you listening to VSOW.